I'm Leah Lane, an award-winning travel writer and author of Places I Remember, Tales, Truths, Delights from 100 Countries. On this podcast, we share conversations with travelers about fascinating destinations and memorable experiences around the world. We're going to have fun on this, our 25th episode of Places I Remember. Our guest is Patricia Schultz, author of the iconic New York Times best-selling series, 1,000 Places to See Before You Die. She's got another book coming next year about why we travel, so look for that one as well. Patricia, you and I are both seasoned travel writers, and between us, we've been probably almost everywhere people want to travel. And we have lots of suggestions and opinions about lots of places. When did you start traveling?
You know, my first memory ever, I was 4 years old. Is that early enough?
That's early.
But, you know, it was something very standard, unremarkable for many people. It was the Jersey Shore. It was our standard yearly August pilgrimage to Atlantic City. Before the casinos, before Snooki, before all of the it's just a lovely, organized, you know, we could always count on it. I was always packed and in the back seat of the station wagon a week in advance, but it was like the biggest event of my year. I thought I was the luckiest kid. So that was my venture beyond my bubble. Was it extravagant? Was it international? No, but I just thought it was the coolest thing to remove myself from, you know, the same old, same old.
Exactly. And to some people, the Jersey Shore is exotic.
It is. And
So,
I love to go back.
Yeah. What started the brand 1,000 Places?
You know, I had been working for travel guides and doing my, you know, periodicals, publications. This was all before the internet, online social media outlets, etc. And I fell into the orbit of Peter Workman, who ultimately became my publisher, the founder of Workman Publishing. And we sat and brainstormed about this idea that we both shared, and that was to compile and collect this remarkable list of wonderful places everywhere in the world, from, you know, the very well-known, you know, all the Taj Mahals and the Metropolitan Operas and the Grand Canyons and the Iguacu Falls, but also all of these very humble, unknown, way off the beaten track, maybe entirely undiscovered places, and make this incredible mix that would inspire people, those, you know, very veteran and traveled, and those who were just starting out and didn't even know where to start. So I was so lucky. I mean, it was really the greatest stroke of luck in my life to have found Peter Workman, who was relatively traveled, but more so was enthusiastic and passionate about this realization that travel is important, and it's ours to have if you find it in yourself to get, you know, out the front door, which is often the most difficult part. You know, the rest is like you just go with the flow, but making it happen can be very daunting to some people. Where do you start? Where do I go? Who do I call? And
that's true.
Oh my gosh, do I travel alone?
Well, you've helped. You've helped with your series. I think many people have used it. Let's have some fun right now. You choose some of your favorite places in the world, whether it's a country, a region, a city, or attraction, and I will too. And let's alternate and discuss. And we'll go alphabetically. You go first.
Well, you know that this is the most daunting question, traveler, because usually it's the place you've just returned from that's still, you know, foremost in your memory. You can still remember people's names or the name of a restaurant you went to until it becomes just this glorious blur. But something that will forever stand out in my mind, because it's simply unlike any other place on the planet, and that is Antarctica. And I've gone relatively recently. I've dreamt about it my entire life. It's not inexpensive. It's not easy to get there, but it's just one of those places that you simply have to see to believe, because it is that astonishing and it is that incredibly beautiful. Serene, poetic, mysterious, glorious, and the bottom of the world, as if, you know, a forgotten planet.
I agree. I was lucky enough to go there myself, and I felt I was a guest in another realm. It was the animals who lived there, and I was only coming in, and it was a different feeling. It's humbling.
It is.
And I will mention there is a way to get a less expensive way there. I think if you go to Ushuaia, there are places you can sort of get last minute tickets. I've heard about that.
There were a lot of people on our ship that just kind of were hanging around Ushuaia, going into the same agencies who would say, come back tomorrow or come back on Thursday. And sure enough, they're, in the cabin next to ours for a fraction of the price. So good on them.
Yeah, I think people should know that. There are ways now to go there. But if you can in your lifetime, you're not probably going to go many times. But I agree, Antarctica is one of the great places. So it's my turn. I'll start with something called Antelope, Slot Canyon. Have you been there?
Yes.
It's surreal. It's just one of the most beautiful places I have ever been. A slot canyon doesn't look like much from the outside, but you go into it. The water has carved into the stone. It's on Navajo land near Page, Arizona, near Lake Powell. And you go into this unbelievable world of swirls and colors, purples and oranges, and you just feel like you're in a dream. The best time to visit it is midday because there's light coming through, especially in the upper canyon, the upper Antelope Slot Canyon. There are two of them. The upper one is more narrow at the top, so you get these wonderful light beams coming through if you come through in the midday. And I think spring or fall might be the best time to go there because it's not as hot. But you will never forget this. I highly recommend it. What do you think, Patricia?
That whole area of America is just being overwhelmed at the moment because everybody who's choosing to travel domestically this summer instead of traveling internationally is discovering what we have here in our backyard. And that's the Four Corners area and all of the Red Rock country and the Slot Canyons and Grand Canyon, which is also usually part of that whole circuit, and Horseshoe Bend. And it's just, we're so fortunate. And actually a big plus is that you can only visit with a Navajo guide. There were a lot of people who I suppose are disappointed they just can't strike off on their own and go independently. But you do, what you were saying before about feeling like you were an invited guest, you are on their sacred territory. And you understand in a nanosecond why they consider it sacred, because it is just so unlike anything you've ever seen before. God bless America. What we have is just...
Yeah, we're very lucky. Beautiful. So what's your next one?
Well, I went upstate New York to my hometown because if you don't go home at the end of all of this to kind of digest what you've experienced, you often don't really create the proper perspective. And I'm one of many, or maybe just a few, who have always loved my hometown, in New York, on the historic and the beautiful Hudson River. It's just an hour from where I'm sitting at the moment in New York City, and yet it's a world apart. I still have friends, I still have family, and I still have a really deep love for the town that kind of launched me on my travels, because my parents were very encouraging, because Pete Seeger was a resident of Beacon, New York, who encouraged us to see America and then beyond. And because I was always a train trip away from New York City, and that was kind of my entree into other worlds.
Yes. I mean, I knew Beacon a while back as well. I lived in Westchester County for many years, and Beacon has revived. There's a beautiful museum, the DIA, which used to be a Nabisco plant, I believe.
Yeah.
And so people come up now just to see the art. It is charming. There are many towns along the Hudson like that. I'm thinking of Hudson, New York as well, which when I came in the 70s to Westchester was kind of run down, and now it's one of the most beautiful areas for antique shops and galleries and restaurants. So it's so nice.
Glad. Yeah, I'm so glad that you mentioned those other towns. I always, focus on Beacon, but Beacon was a real catalyst, and the DIA Museum really gave a real jolt to all of these, what the New York Times called scrappy riverside towns, and brought people easily on a 1-hour train ride from New York City for the day and the weekend. And then they started purchasing second homes. And then now with, working remotely, they've moved there permanently. And it's historically so important, thanks to Henry Hudson, in 1609, I believe. Sailed up.
Thanks, Henry. Hank. Thanks, Hank. How about another one? How about Bali? That's one of my absolute favorites. I don't know if you've been. Have you been, Patricia? Yeah, it's absolutely special. And I think especially in the middle of the island. I think the coastal areas have beautiful hotels and wonderful beaches, but a lot of people, it's kind of like the Caribbean for Australians. They come for vacation. If you go into the center, at least when I did, which was quite a while ago, maybe 25 years ago, I'm not so sure now, but it was quiet. There were spectacular organic hotels, with open air showers and views of the gorges and the valleys and the rice paddies. And you could enjoy the culture, the dances. Each village had its own dance, and each village had its own specialty in art. And the people moved so beautifully. It was almost a sinuous beauty to their movement, like the sinuous rice paddies. And I just fell in love with the beauty of the Hindu culture there. They would offer you beautiful little flowers and bits to eat every moment you would walk around. You'd be getting an offering. It was very special at that point. I hope so.
Yeah, it's still, well, it has changed. I mean, not surprisingly, because of its proximity, as you mentioned. I didn't understand after it took me 5 days to get there, how easy it was for, the Sydney siders to jump on a plane. And in 2 hours, they were in Ubud for, their spring break. So there is a lot of damage that's been done, but the island is quite large, and they've managed to, I think, preserve a lot of its special character. But you do need to look for it, I think, a little bit more carefully, but it's there and it's beautiful. And there are thousands of other islands in the archipelago of Indonesia that are absorbing a lot of the overflow that in some ways are, just as beautiful as Bali was 5, 10, even 20 years ago.
Yes. I think one of the things, again, is to try to travel whenever you can, when it isn't crowded, if it's possible, off season. That helps a lot. But I would say, in any case, seek out the center of Bali. What's your next one, Patricia?
Well, I could not possibly go forward with this list if I didn't touch upon Italy. There's a wonderful quote by, I think it's Verdi, who said, "You may have the universe if I may have Italy."
I like
and
that.
I heard that and I said, okay, book me to Florence. So my mother is from southern Italy with the surname like Schultz. I'm clearly Teutonic. Thank you, Dad. I was raised in a household where I was always led to believe that I was 500% Italian. So this is the kind of ancestral tourism or roots tourism where sometimes the first trips you take are often to your family to explore your family background. So I went to Italy to see where my mother came from, understood very immediately that while it was fascinating to me and it gave me a lot of texture in terms of understanding more my family heritage, I knew quite clearly that I wasn't going to be spending a lot of time there. I would in the country, but I went from the south north to Florence for just a few weeks and stayed for 4 years. I took every moment, every opportunity, every weekend to get on a train, to go explore, to see different towns within Tuscany, but also beyond, because there's no other country that I've ever experienced where top to bottom, there is just so much jam-packed in terms of natural beauty, but of course, in terms of history and art and music and food and food.
And food.
And more food. And the loveliness of the people, really to just sit with a cappuccino in an outdoor cafe and people watch for the rest of the day is an experience that I would get on a plane tomorrow to do all of.
Absolutely. On my honeymoon, we stayed in the small town of Fiesole above Florence at a Renaissance monastery, lucky us, called Villa San Michele, with a facade supposedly by Michelangelo. And I thought I was in heaven. I still think, I was in heaven. And then my very favorite memory of Florence is right after 9/11. I was a guest with a handful of other writers from New York, and Florence opened its heart to us. I mean, they gave us special parties. There were just maybe 6 of us. We represented New York to them, and the mayor came with us, and I will never forget that place and that time, and I will never forget Florence for giving that.
Yeah, it's such a special. In fact, I think just 2 or 3 years ago, and perhaps the same rating continues, it was ranked or voted the #1 most visited city in all of Europe, which says a lot because competition is
It's high.
yeah, it's not always a good thing because it's over touristy,
Right.
beloved. But like you mentioned before, there's always off season and there's always a back alleyway. Get away from the main piazzas, the $20 cappuccinos, and wander and see parts of Florence or any place where you are, where tourists have not yet discovered. It's not that difficult, and I highly recommend it.
Absolutely. Well, one of the other popular places in Europe is Barcelona. And the reason I'm including it is because of Gaudi, of Antoni Gaudi. I love architecture, and I could go back anytime to visit the Park Girl. I'm not pronouncing the Park Girl correctly, I'm sure, and the Sagrada Familia Cathedral, which is not yet finished. It's been 100 years almost. It's going to be finished supposedly in 2026, and I've watched it go up and be completed over and over as I've been back. But it's just a brilliant city for a lot of reasons. It's got the beaches. It's got a beautiful Gothic center. You have tapas. That's the place where you really have the best, I think, anywhere. It's just a beautiful place. And there's a music hall there that is not by Gaudi that I also think is spectacular. It's Art Nouveau. And I would just go in to look at it. It's got a huge skylight and a stained glass skylight that's not to be believed. So if you like Gaudi, it is a must, and it's a beautiful area in general. There are a lot of fishing villages along the coast. It's the northeast coast of Spain, so you can go there if you wanted to go to the beach a little bit. And it's Catalonia. It's the capital of Catalonia, which is an autonomous community in Spain. And so it's an interesting difference there. You can kind of feel it when you go there. There's a pride in that.
And it's also a very, very, very popular port of call if you're to do one of the cruises in the Mediterranean. Many people, the first question out of their mouth is, do we stop in Barcelona? It's an easy way to visit it, if only for a few hours or overnight, but at least you get a taste and then you can go back.
Exactly.
At leisure. And it's up near it's in the northeast corner on the coastline. So it's very easy to by train. The train system throughout all of Europe now is so advanced. It really makes us look so Middle Ages. But you can grab a train and be in, along the south of France within an hour or 3 or 4 easily and efficiently, and then experience a whole other culture in just one trip.
Exactly. You can go, there's a little country called Andorra, which is about an hour up from Barcelona, and it's mountainous and very different and very beautiful. So you can have a little mini vacation. I will say we'll have to put one caveat on Barcelona. It is a center of pickpocketing, and I have been a victim of it. And I'm saying this because it's so beautiful. I want you to go, but I also want you to be careful. So do check, when you're going somewhere, make sure you're aware of this sort of thing as well. That's a little bit of reality in a dreamy place. What's your next place? What's your next place?
Well, I probably took one of my most eye-opening trips solo when I think I was around late 20s. Yeah. I went so this is 100 years ago, to Istanbul. There's
Istanbul, yeah.
Whose names, since I was a kid playing Risk with my cousins on the living room floor, Siam, Istanbul, Zanzibar, Madagascar, these names just, Timbuktu. And Istanbul was right up there. It has changed massively since then. And in other ways, not at all, because the whole Eastern-Western vibe, because it's the only city in the world that straddles 2 continents. So not half, but part of Istanbul is firmly in Asia. And the other part, joined by bridges and now an underground tunnel, is in Europe. So that mix is unlike anything I had ever seen as a very, rookie traveler at that point in my life. And even until today, my most recent trip, I've been back a number of times, was maybe 2 or 3 years ago. Again, another port of call, those wonderful Eastern Mediterranean cruises that start in Athens often and do many of the Greek islands, and then wind up in Ephesus and ultimately Istanbul. where your cruise ends. And ideally, you can stay on a few days or a few months.
Or life.
Yeah. But
well, you mentioned, go on.
A wonderful, wonderful, wonderful people, hospitable, welcoming, lovely, handsome to look at, and markets and food. Oh, the food is just out of this world, fresh and wonderful.
And the Hagia Sophia Grand Mosque sort of symbolizes the East and West. It was a church before it became a mosque. And you like that
from
as
the
well.
6th century.
Yep.
It's one of the only structures from that period of antiquity that's still standing today. And it's standing in a way, it just underwent, I believe it was completed a year or two ago, maybe still going on, a multi-gajillion dollar renovation. So the mosaics and the frescoes, and it's just been reverted to a mosque.
Right.
Built as a basilica by Emperor Justinian. After that, it was converted to a mosque by the Ottomans. And then it was Ataturk, the father of modern day Turkey, who stripped it of all religious significance until a year ago. This is a very recent development. Not everybody is happy. The local people certainly are. Erdogan, the kind of driving force behind the conversion, is very proud of what has happened, and it's still open to the public. And it is a UNESCO site. It's probably the first time and UNESCO's had to deal with anything like it, where it keeps changing. But anyway, it's just worth getting, to Istanbul merely to see that alone.
Okay, well, I have a place that's far from that. It's the Galapagos Islands off the coast of Ecuador, about 1,000 kilometers off. And it's interesting because the Galapagos Islands are right on the equator. So you've got part of them in the northern hemisphere and part in the southern hemisphere. I don't know if many people know that, but it's so isolated that, of course, you have these magnificent variety of creatures that Darwin went to just to seek out, and he found what he wanted. You have giant tortoises, blue-footed boobies, flamingos, seals, reptiles, mammals, birds, amphibians of all kinds, over 9,000 species. And they're not afraid of us because we're not allowed to touch them. So the best part of that vacation to me was that I could get right up close. There's a little zone where you can't go past it, but if you get right up close, you'll find what it is. And you're face to face with everybody, all the animals. I highly recommend, if possible, to go on a small boat so that you can get there early in the morning before the crowds come and just commune with the animals. They are wonderful. It's one of the great experiences. And if you can take your family, that is the most special place to me.
Yeah, it's people don't, I think, have that on their wish list when they think of where do we bring the kids next. It's always, Yosemite and Grand Canyon, but it's of a different price range. You would need the budget, but do you know how much Disney World costs on a daily?
Exactly. I think if you prioritize it, you can find a way in your lifetime. Let's put it that way. It isn't something you're going to do all the time, but it's something to keep in mind.
Yes.
What's your next one?
Well, since Cuba has been in the headlines for the last many decades, but especially these days, it's a place that I went to when it wasn't all that encouraged, or I wouldn't consider it illegal. It's just that you needed to go through the back door, which is what we did. We transited through Cancun and flew with Mexican Air into Havana, only to arrive and see that, maybe we were only a handful of Americans, but there were tons of European tourists. I had some, in my innocence, I thought, well, if America can't go, no one can go, but in of it, and they're there in large numbers. They don't seem to find it as fascinating as we do. But, with so much of America of Cuban descent, or even, first generation newly arrived Cubans, I had so many friends. I was so fascinated to be there. There's some, for all of the tribulations and the horrific things that have gone on, the people have such a resilience and such a loveliness and such a warmth, because everybody has somebody they know who lives in your building or in your.
Well, I live in Miami, so you can imagine. It took me 45 minutes, only 45 minutes, and I went to a place that was one of the most different places I had ever been, even though it was so close. The whole attitude there was no internet in 2014 when I was there, and it was just full of artistic fervor and energy. And I was struck, as you were, by the people. And the crumbling buildings were, the crumbling buildings looked sad, but they were extraordinarily beautiful. And I wish those people such luck and hope. I feel for them.
Yes. It's a very, very unique, and you can't say that about many places anywhere in the world and the Caribbean. It's a unique pocket within the Caribbean region that once things improve, it is so worth to make every effort to go there, because when things do change, they'll change extraordinarily and they'll change quickly.
Yes.
And they need our support now.
Agreed. So let's go to the Grand Mosque in Abu Dhabi. That's a switch. I'm including this because I wanted to see it. I was in Abu Dhabi twice, and the first time, believe it or not, it was on a quick tour, and I didn't get to see it. And I thought about this for years, and on another trip, I made my way there just to see it, and it was well worth it. It's a magnificent example of architecture. It's called the Sheikh Zayed Grand Mosque. It's in the capital city of Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates. It's the largest mosque in the country. They can fit about 50,000 people if they really have to. And it has 82 domes, more than 1,000 columns. It has 24-karat gold gilded chandeliers, the world's largest hand-knotted carpet. But beyond that, it's just a magnificent example of human creation. It was done in 10 years. And I looked at it from all angles, and we stayed at a hotel across the street from it so I could see it in the night and in the morning, because I really wanted to see it a lot since I had missed it the first time. I'm including it because you should follow your dreams, go where you really want. If you can, prioritize it, as I said. And if you really want to, you'll get there sometime in your lifetime. That's one of the places I got to see.
Yeah, it is just beautiful. And it's all white marble. I think cleared out the entire marble.
Acres of white marble.
Yes.
What's your next one?
Well, speaking of that general area of the Persian Gulf, but I did want to, it was charming when you said it's the largest mosque in the country, because the country is only the size of my neighborhood here.
Right. But they have a lot of mosques.
Yes. But it's also one of the few mosques in, the area of the Middle East that welcomes non-Muslims.
Yes.
And when you go on, I believe you need to go with the guide. We always went with the guide. I've been in there twice, and it's just, it just opens your mind to what went into the construction of it. Just the artisans and the artists who were brought in from all over the world to do that. But it is massive, regardless of how small the country is. But there we are in the United Arab Republic, neighboring Dubai, and then the other islands like Bahrain and Qatar. But just across the Gulf is Persia, ancient Persia, what we know today as Iran. And that was a country that since my first week of my first semester of my was friends with the Persian contingent of my university in Washington, D.C., where there has always been beyond campus, there's always been a large Persian community there. And they just introduced me to this culture and country where the Shah at that point reigned, about which I knew absolutely nothing. And it has been since then that I've wanted to go. And I finally did 3 or 4 years ago. And talk about going to these places when you can. You really need to carpe diem, carpe the opportunity. And if the opportunity isn't put on your desk or in your lap, then you make it happen. Because look what is happening now. Things are not stable. It's kind of off the table for Americans. Although Europeans can still go, if you have any European followers who are listening, it's always painted as if it's, risky and dangerous and you'll never see home again. And I'm here to tell you that in my life, I have never, ever been in a country that is that welcoming and that lovely and that remarkable.
I remember seeing an Anthony Bourdain episode where he was walking through the streets and the people were the friendliest. And he commented the same thing. He said, these are the nicest people I've ever met.
They had no idea who he was.
No, they were just friendly.
Everybody's a rock star.
Exactly.
They seem to be Western. And if you're American, you're even more welcomed because they love everything American. It was hard for me to wrap my head around that. And also Rick Steves, who is Mr. Europe, kind of went beyond his boundaries, went to Iran because he too had always been hearing about the hospitality and the welcome. Yeah. And I saw that episode and I thought, book me now.
Yeah.
I loved it.
Well, I'm going to take you to a natural wonder, and you mentioned it earlier. It's one that's on lots of lists, but I adored it. It was Iguacu Falls on the border between Brazil and Argentina. I've been fortunate enough to be able to have been to most of the falls, including Victoria Falls and Niagara Falls and such. But to me, this is the most beautiful falls because it's in the jungle. It's a natural looking falls that's special in daylight and at the nighttime. I was able to go when it was a moonlit night. And in the daytime, there were rainbows, and at night, there were stars above it. And there are walkways all down through it. It's just spectacular. You can go on a boat underneath it. You can stay a night in the Argentinian side, especially, and walk around and have a lovely time. Besides the falls, there are all kinds of things to do. I just think of orchids and rainbows and jungle.
Paris.
And I know
In
there's
Paris.
275 separate cascades, but to me, it's just this huge amount of gorgeousness. And I highly recommend Iguazu Falls.
Yeah, it really is, I think, one of the kind of the must-see attractions of the continent. Each continent seems to have their falls, and they're always competing with the next. And each one is special for what it is. And I went to Niagara for the first time only about, I would say, 7 or 8 years ago. I'm sure I went when I was 6 with the family. I don't know. It always does. I didn't go on my honeymoon.
Right.
Popular in the 60s and 70s and to this day. But it's pretty spectacular. But each of these falls has their own setting, immersed in their own culture, because in South America, as you say, you can, visit the Argentine side or the Brazilian side, or, Victoria Falls is always kind of tagged on pre or post safari. So that's pretty cool as well. But, to think that most of the things you have to see in life are all man-made, the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul we were talking about, or Florence, all of the Renaissance beauty, but all of these natural beauties. So my next one is because I hold it dear to my heart for no other many reasons, especially because it was the last escape before I came home to a world that was locked down by COVID. And that was Southeast Asia, to the country of Laos. It's a really region of the world that I love, Vietnam, Myanmar, Vietnam, Cambodia. I had never been to Laos, which is, I think, the smallest of that country in that peninsula. And the one city that everybody seems to love the most, and now I know why, is Luang Prabang, because it has a name that deserves to be on Jeopardy. Luang Prabang, and it was the original capital up in the mountainous north. And at the border, we flew into Chiang Rai in northern Thailand. And at the border of Thailand and Laos, in the northwest corner, you can get on a boat and float down the Mekong River, because the Mekong River makes its way through, I think, 7 or 8 different countries. It originates in China, which has become a problem because of the damming and the water supplies. But it originates in China, flows down, ultimately empties into the Mekong Delta, which Americans of a certain age will always know because of the Vietnam War coverage. But as an innocent tourist or traveler, to go to the Mekong Delta and see how millions of people, it's a massive area, it's very fertile, and a lot of stilted villages, a lot of traditional lifestyles. It's a fascinating corner. But I digress, because Laos itself, to me, was a real eye-opener. There were close to no tourists at all, and this was in early March. But everybody was telling me, no, you can go. There's some of the nicest people. I just love that whole area of Southeast Asia. I don't know if you have been, but I go back.
Yes. I lived in Thailand for a while, and it's absolutely, it was wonderful.
I read somewhere that Bangkok is the #1 most visited city in the world. I'm sure.
Wow.
Like different when we were there. Just kind
the traffic was terrible in Bangkok when I was there a long time ago. So I can only imagine. Yes. I hope they fixed it. Let's move along, because we have so many places. So I'm going to give you one that you might have been. I hope you've been to. You've been so many places. Namibia. Have you been?
Yes.
Isn't it wonderful? Okay. I'm just going to generally tell you that it's got the highest dunes in the world, supposedly. I don't know who measures them, but but they are very tall and they're red. If you get there in the morning, you have to get up really early. And in a certain desert, there's a Namib desert and there's other deserts. But if you get there early enough in the morning, you have half the dune in shadow and half it's brilliant red, and you can climb it, and it's so spectacular. There's also some wonderful diverse wildlife in Etosha National Park. You have the largest cheetah population in the world. It's a very protected country, very ecologically savvy. So I'm very pleased to hear that because, so much has been destroyed so many places, but this country really cares tremendously about its natural resources. There's something called the Skeleton Coast where there are shipwrecks and the white dunes come down to the ocean, and it's just gorgeous. And if you get to South Africa, it's not that far. I mean, it's,
it was part of South Africa.
It was carved out. So it's a quick plane ride away. And I hope you remember Namibia because they're lovely people again, and it's a gorgeous place, and I highly recommend it.
Many people who have, ticked off the African safari experience, as everyone should, because to me, it's just one of the great must-do things in your life if you can manage it. Then often, we'll go back a second time and a third time because Africa offers so much. It's not a country, it's a continent.
Exactly.
There are, I think, 50 countries that make up Africa, and each one offers their own special thing. But if you want to keep on this safari top in your life, to go see the elephants or the big five or the gorillas in Uganda, or, people then often will go to Namibia after they've done the classic and traditional safari, because it's a safari of a different kind. And it's a very, very different experience. And it is so worth the effort to get there, because flying to Africa, as you know, is not an easy thing, but much easier these days than before when you'd have to change 3 or 4 times. Now there are nonstop flights to many cities in Africa where you can then connect.
So what would be your next one?
Well, I was speaking before about Iran, and we're still, once I discovered Central Asia, I just thought I was onto a whole new thing in my life that, it's amazing until you go there physically and realize that it exists, and how in the world have you ever not heard of it or been there or wanted to go there. And that's how I felt with the stands. So the stands are stand in the local language means land. So Afghanistan was the land of the Afghans, and Uzbekistan, which I'm about to go on about how fantastic it is, was the land of the Uzbekis. And this is all Silk Road country, because this was the area of Asia where, coming from east of there, China, and then passing through this desert land westward towards the Mediterranean, where they put all of their precious goods on ships and boats, and then dispersed these precious cargoes throughout Europe. Uzbekistan and the neighboring stands, of which we visited 5, because, hey, as long as you're in the neighborhood.
Right.
But Uzbekistan is the darling. Everybody's talking now about Uzbekistan because there are just so many different things in UNESCO sites, even within Uzbekistan, to see, and relatively easily to get from A to B to C to D. But it's, it goes back thousands of years. The Uzbeki people, having had this heritage of merchants and caravans passing through for centuries and centuries, they've always had foreigners. So you're just another welcomed foreigner as far as they're concerned. And they love Americans. And the welcome there was not unlike what we had in Iran. So it's fantastic. It's fascinating. It's like another world. It's unlike anything I had experienced. And we spent a number of weeks there, and I would go back. It's not easy to get to, but certainly to go once. And I really encourage people to go back with a guided tour, because you can go independently, but I would have missed 90% of what I walked away with in my head, in my understanding and my appreciation for the culture and the heritage, had we not had a remarkable guide. And also it facilitates things, because to cross the borders, this was 3 or 4 years ago, to cross the borders from one stand to the next is very doable with, in my case, an American passport, but you needed visas and paperwork, and it's all facilitated when you go on an organized tour.
Well, I'm going to take you to more famous cities. My last two that I'm going to mention, just because they're both so magical, I'm going to just put them together, and everybody knows about them, are New York City and Paris. Those are the two cities in the world where if anyone says, do you want to go? I'll go no matter what. I find energy, culture, sexiness, food, all the magical things that a city can offer in both of them. Each one is different. I think some feel New York isn't beautiful, but it's beautiful in its own way. Paris is beautiful for sure. And I don't know what it is about that city, but it is.
It's always a good idea.
It's always a good idea. It's like perfume is in the air. It's just, I don't know what it is, but I just feel different when I go there. I'm so happy to have been there. I often try to go whenever I feel I have to get out, and I'm lucky enough as a travel writer to be able to do it. But I think New York is where I was born. Like you said, it's a feeling about that, and I've always loved it. It's gone through ups and downs. It's I hope it comes back strong now, but I will always love it. And Paris, well, it's like a lover. He'll always be there in my heart.
You know, there's a wonderful cartoon that keeps popping up on social media from the New Yorker, and the wife is walking out of the front door with her little handled, it's a very 60s maybe cartoon. She's walking out the front door, and her husband is sitting in the chair reading his newspaper, how yesterday. And she says, I'm going to Paris where I can be another person.
Exactly. And a better person.
Yeah.
A sexier person.
And, I went for some reason, my husband, who's been with me, not much of a traveler in the beginning, and I created a monster. So he's been to Papua New Guinea, he's been to Bhutan, he's been to Antarctica. He had never been to Paris. And I said, we have to rectify this. And we took one of those wonderful river cruises from Paris up to Normandy, the Normandy coast. And I made sure we spent time in the beginning and at the end so that he could explore. And he was blown away. He said, I never understood what a beautiful city. And I said, well, have you been living in a cave? All of the movies that have been filmed here, all of the things that you hear. And I said, didn't you imagine that it was this beautiful? And he said, it's hard to imagine this kind of beauty because it's architectural, but it's also an energy and a vibe, and it's the people, and it's the cobblestone streets. He was amazed there were cobblestone streets, as well as...
Well, the left bank is medieval. Yeah, the left bank is from the Roman times and before, and medieval as well.
It was so interesting, and I find this when I travel with small groups too, which I like to do, is you always see, it wakes up in you this the novelty of a place, because you see these destinations through the eyes of other people who are oftentimes seeing it for the first time. And that's a wonderful thing, because you see it all over again. You see it with new eyes, don't you? So
I agree. I'm going to let you end with something I was talking to you about at one point. I never got to go yet. And it's those wonderful gorillas in Uganda. Can you just end with that?
Yes. And I think, go today or go tomorrow or go, ASAP, because we never thought that something would stop us in our tracks. We're Americans. We could always travel. We could, put it on a side burner. We can go when the kids are out of school, or when, you have 2 weeks, we can. And then suddenly COVID happened, and we realized that nothing is promised. There are no guarantees. So prioritize what is important to you in life. And if you don't have gorillas at the very tippity top of your wish list, I'm here to tell you that they should be, because it was a life-changing, and I don't use that expression often. I mean, travel gives you all different kinds of experiences, but this one in particular, and I have to say, it wasn't just the gorillas, but all of Uganda is a spectacular country. And it's always associated with the gorillas because it's one of only 3 countries, neighboring Rwanda and the Congo, which doesn't get much tourism at all, where you can see these mountain gorillas, which now number about 1,000. And the troops or families of gorillas that we saw in Uganda have been habituated. So, and it's taken years for the rangers to go in and sit with them for a minute, and then 10 minutes, and then it'll be an hour. And then they'll go, there's no contact, there's no physical contact, but they will habituate these families of gorillas with one silverback and sometimes a dozen or many dozens of other members of this troop. so that they'll see this, two-legged white person standing there, and it's no big deal. We're not a threat. We're not going to harm them. They even let the juveniles and the babies come up to our ankles and climb up our legs. I mean,
oh my goodness,
something magnificent. And the countryside is rich and fertile. Winston Churchill called it the pearl of Africa. The wildlife beyond the gorillas is something that'll take your breath away. And the people, my friend who had just come back said, be ready to see a lot of teeth. People are always smiling.
Yeah.
And it's from the heart, it's genuine, and it's just a standout experience in all of Africa. And that says something, because Africa is a remarkable destination in and of itself.
Well, that sounds fantastic. The name of the podcast is Places I Remember, and we've shared a lot of memories, but can you share one last one with us that's really special for you and a really special?
The reason this particular memory is so special to me after years is because it hits on so many different things that I've understood over time are what we hope for, and you can just never pay in advance and be guaranteed of or anticipate. And if you happen upon them, then it's always just serendipity, isn't it? Consider yourself a very, very lucky traveler. And that is when we, of all things, had our 7:00 a.m. departure from Casablanca Airport canceled. We had gotten there at 4:00 in the dark of night as we were told it was canceled. We didn't know what to do. We were desperate to get to Fez. And we had thought the only way to get there was by air. It was over an hour flight, but in fact, you can go there by car. So we went outside the airport, fell into the wonderful company of Mohammed, who had a Mercedes cab, he told us. It was from another century. It was held together by duct tape. He was the loveliest man. And we said, we need to get to Fez, but first you have to take us to the best place in Casablanca for couscous, because we've been up for 8 hours and we're starved. And he said, no problem. Long story short, he took us home. His mother had been cooking couscous. It was Friday or Saturday. It was the big day of the week for couscous. For hours, we were welcomed like family. The whole village came. He lived in a suburb outside of Casablanca. He had 2 daughters who were studying French in school, in grade school. All they wanted to know about was Britney Spears and Justin Timberlake. We sat around the table. We ate with our hands. I'm not sure what we ate. It was some of the most delicious couscous, some of the most heartwarming. We were ready to cancel Fez. We just wanted to be with Mohammed and his family. And when they saw us off, everybody from the neighboring buildings came back and waved us on. And it was the standout memory I'll have of many different trips to.
Yes.
The hospitality you find in countries that until you visit, you see as maybe a little threatening or maybe not so safe, turns out to be absolutely the difference.
I agree with you. I think so many times it's the people that you remember the most. I can tell you also in Greece, I'm thinking off the top of my head, in Greece and in Russia and other places, I've been in homes where people, like our guide or someone I meet on the street, has welcomed me, and it's the memory I cherish the most of the country. So thank you so much for that. You're absolutely on target. Thank you so much, Patricia Schultz, author of the series, 1,000 Places to See Before You Die. May there be at least another 1,000 places for you to see as you travel the world. And on this 25th episode, I want to also thank this podcast, thousands of listeners in over 1,000 cities in over 70 countries so far. I love sharing with you the places and the stories that I and my guests remember most. And I love to hear from you with ideas, comments, and questions. My links are in my show notes, so stay in touch. And you can always go to my website, placesirememberlealane.com. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to our award-winning podcast. We've recorded over 100 episodes of Places I Remember, so follow us on any podcast app. And new monthly episodes are also on YouTube with gorgeous video. My book, Places I Remember, is available in print and Kindle, and I read the audio version. Follow my travel writing at Forbes.com. Contact me at the links in the show notes or on my website, placesirememberlealane.com, and keep making your own travel memories.